trickle in. Wait a little bit longer before we get started officially. And thank you all for coming as you're hopping on. We appreciate having you all here. And hello again, everyone. Just gonna wait a little bit. I think I might get started now. Seems like it's kind of stopped for the moment. So, hello everyone. My name is Zach Solomon. I'm the manager of membership and education for the Palm Springs International Film Society. Thank you all for attending this private Q&A session for our Palm Springs ShortFest famous gala block program, which is typically like one of our favorite nights of the festival and weeks of the festival. We love these movies so much in this block. The programming team was really excited to show these movies to you, and we're really happy to have the filmmakers here. Before we get started, I just want to say that on behalf of the festival, we want to acknowledge the pain and the anger we're feeling right now, not just about the most recent events we've witnessed, but also about the long-standing history of injustice and inequality. We stand with Black Lives Matter. We are committed to working together to move our community, our country, and the world closer to unity, understanding, and inclusivity. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We will get to those at the end. Please do not put questions in the chat. We'll try to get to those if you do put them in the chat, but it's easier if you just put it in the Q&A section. Let's see, what else? And we'll just have everybody, and this session is being recorded. So we will have this live on our YouTube channel sometime pretty shortly after this. And with that, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. If the program, and we have a special treat. We have some programmers from the festival here joining us as well. If Robert and Dominique would introduce themselves to everybody. Start with Dominique.
Hi, my name is Dominique O'Neill, and I am one of the shorts programmers for ShortFest.
And I am Robert John Torres, and I am also one of the programmers on staff for Palm Springs ShortFest.
Thanks for joining us. And then if we could start with Beth, could you introduce yourself to the members and your film?
Sure. My name is Beth Einhorn. I'm a co-director of The Star Sisters.
Carlton?
Hello, everyone. I'm Carlton Daniel. I'm the writer and director of Homegoing.
And Tyler?
Tyler Rabinowitz, and I'm the writer-director of See You Soon.
And Andrew. Speaking of
I'm Andrew Moyer, and I produced and directed Take Me to Prom.
And thank you all so much for joining us today. All of your movies are really incredible. We're so proud to have them here, and we're so grateful to have you join us. I guess, there's a lot to, I'm just going to ask a general question to start it off, which is how did you come about finding your film? For the documentarians, how did you come about finding your central figures of your films? And then for See You Soon and Homecoming, what was the inspiration for your movies? Start with Beth.
So it was very random how I met the Star Sisters. I went to a comedy club to see someone perform. I was doing a short, and it was really dark, and I'm like 5'10", and I sat down and I heard behind me, of course the tall one has to sit in front of us. And I was like, okay, that's me. I turned around, and then there was these two women sitting behind me, and I was like, I'm so sorry, and like moved over, and I said, okay, I need to know everything about you two. Like, who are you? What's going on here? And they gave me their card, and I didn't really think anything of it. And later on, I needed to do something with like sort of a Broadway Danny Rose type characters. I said, what about those ladies? And then I like searched for their card, and anyway, and I ended up meeting them, and we became friends. And then I heard their story, and I was like, it was amazing, and I thought this should be told. So that's it.
Andrew, what was the process of getting all the submissions of people telling their stories about their proms? Was there like a submission process, or did you find these people individually?
I got a green light to make the documentary, and I just sort of like went about finding really interesting people in as many ways as I could possibly imagine. So I just created posters and put them all up all over the place. Like there's a queer sort of like neighborhood in Toronto where I live, and I just would like kind of sit around on the street and just meet people. And so it was just a whole bunch of different things. Like one thing led to another. Like, you know, like some of the funnier people, I met Fontaine like on the street, and the oldest subject, Alf, he lived in a long-term care home that had an LGBT population. They were all just through different ways, and I just like tried really hard to meet as many people as I could. I met with 70 people, and we just went out for drinks, and I just get to know them, and I made prom in high school basically off limits because I wanted to sort of like maintain the spontaneity. If I included them in the film, I wanted to have like the prom story happen for me, like in the moment that we were filming. And then from the 70 people who I met, I picked 7 and had to sort of like make sure that the casting worked with the timeline. And yeah, it was just many, many months of meeting really cool people.
Tyler, there's kind of a tradition of brief encounter movies that I feel like See You Soon is sort of working within. Is that something that you were trying to have a dialogue with and coming to See You Soon?
Yeah, definitely. That's some of my favorite movies, or some of the movies that sort of changed for me my perception of what a queer film could be. Are some of those films, whether it's Weekend or Call Me by Your Name, Moonlight. I mean, the list goes on of like these films that have sort of a stylized naturalism where these vignettes are playing out and there's room to breathe, and you're really just living with these characters. But at the same time, the camera has sort of a rhyme or a reason for where it's placed and how the story's being told. And at the same time, I really wanted to make this film because it was inspired by a personal experience. I was very resistant to dating apps until I tried one when I was living on one side of the country, and I met someone who lived on the other side of the country. We must have crossed paths, and ultimately decided to spend a weekend with them. And for me, what really surprised me was how intense, like what a whirlwind it all felt like. And it felt like it was compounded not just by the actual situation, but also by queerness and by growing up thinking on some level, as someone who grew up in South Florida, thinking that I would never get to experience sort of a whirlwind, almost like fairy tale type of a romance. And so when I was in the middle of it, I think I was so overwhelmed and feeling emotions that I had guarded myself from ever feeling, because I felt like I had like an armor around my heart that sort of melted over that weekend. And after that, I realized I wanted to try and paint that on screen.
Carlton, how did you come about starting the process of writing Homegoing?
The process started after working in a funeral home. It was one of my first jobs in high school, and actually one of the first jobs when I left film school, and I came back home for a little bit to kind of regroup and kind of figure out the next step. And I spent time in these spaces and was really moved and inspired by not only the family who owned the business, but the people who I was meeting and the people who were coming in for our services. And I was really inspired and wanted to write about that experience, to tell something truthful about the people in the community as well. I think that funeral space actually says a lot about the beautiful things that are happening and taking place there, as well as a lot of the things that need change and a lot of work and improvement. So, yeah.
I'll open it up to any of the programmers if there's something you want to ask or discuss.
Oh, I wanted to ask Tyler, I didn't know that it was such a personal story. And I guess I'm just curious, are either one of the characters, I guess, more of you, were you writing one of them as though it was you?
Yeah, I would say that the lead was more inspired by me in that there was kind of, you know, sort of, I made the effort to fly across the country and like spend that money and like take that risk and like go stay at a person's apartment that I had never met before, but at the same time had certain reservations or hesitations about how much to open up of myself. And at the same time, the person I had met was so much more open and down to like give it a try. And by the end of the weekend and by the time I was in the car going back to the airport, realized that I wanted to give it a try too. And so, yeah, I'd say the lead for sure.
It's such a beautiful last shot, staying on his face, you know, as this sort of flickering cascade of emotions falls onto him. It's really quite beautiful.
It was really special. I had been familiar with his work. He's actually in Jeremy O. Harris's Slave play. He was in the off-Broadway and then the Broadway production playing the role of Dustin. And James can do anything. Johnny too. A lot of the film was actually improvised by the two of them.
And did you, I guess, have to kind of come up with some sort of chemistry? Did you know they would fit together so wonderfully, or was that a risk?
They actually, coincidentally, when we were casting, they went to college together. They both went to Marymount in undergrad in acting school. So they had been accustomed to doing scenes together for many years prior. And so I feel like for a short, especially something that's quite an intimate short, to try and build that chemistry so quickly is rather hard, right? And I had found on a previous film I produced called Lavender, which is also a kind of intimate queer film, those actors had a prior relationship, having all been in Torch Song on Broadway, and or at least two of the three of them. And so anyways, I just recognized that would be very important to find actors that had a history so that chemistry could be there.
Nice. I guess I'm also interested, really, for all of the films, how, you know, when you set out and you make something that is queer themed, what sort of tone do you establish on set with the crew? You know, as we all know, there's so many people that go into making a film. You know, how do you really establish a sort of respectful, you know, safe space to explore these stories? I imagine for most crew members, maybe telling queer stories isn't something they're doing all the time. You know, these are still in some ways niche, unfortunately. But I'd be interested in hearing the filmmakers kind of talk about that.
Beth, why don't you start it off?
Okay, well, our whole crew was 3 people, so there wasn't a lot of people. And also with the Star Sisters, you know, Randa, who's lesbian, has been that way since she was a kid. So she didn't have any sort of, you know, feeling about telling her story. And so I felt that there was just the truth of it, and it was freeing for her. But she's been an open lesbian, you know, so for me, I don't think that there was any struggle or anything. I think that just telling their life story about the abuse and stuff was, you know, much more a bigger part of that, you know, her being a lesbian, she's lesbian and she's out and proud. So that's it. Andrew?
A lot of the people who were on my crew are from the LGBT community, so I think there was a certain level of understanding there. Like the vibe that I kind of tried to establish on set was, for every interview that happened, it was the person who's in front of the camera's moment and their time, and it was all kind of choreographed around them. So even like the atmosphere of each interview is sort of really guided by the person. So, you know, Fontaine is the drag queen, and it was very much about like pandering to Fontaine. to Fontaine a whole hour, which was really fun. And a lot of the key crew knew the subjects because I really like involved everybody in getting to know the subjects beforehand. Because, for example, the production designer, met with them individually one by one to kind of figure out like what they wanted to do for the set design. And so at that point, like each of the subjects basically were like legendary by the time they stepped on the set for the whole crew, because they've been hearing about them for weeks beforehand. And so I think everyone was just really excited to meet them and see them. And I really wanted to like not talk to them beforehand because I really was trying to preserve the spontaneity before the shoot. So I don't know, it kind of felt like the curtain was withdrawn with every interview. And it was very fun. Like it was kind of high pressure, but fun. And they're all very performative in their own ways. So they were all kind of like giving their own little performance. And I just wanted to make them feel like really special. And the crew was really up to just make them feel awesome for the hour and a half that they were there.
Carlton?
Well, for homegoing, I mean, first and foremost, the whole cast and crew were comprised of all either, underrepresented groups, either Black, Brown, Latino, LGBT folks, women, people who like represent the other, I guess. So everyone came from an experience of appreciating and respecting our work and our histories, where we came from. So that was the first step to create that inclusive environment. But then, I mean, it's not to say we didn't have problems. I mean, there was definitely scenes that I wanted to push further with some of the actors that didn't go quite as planned. But looking back on that experience, things like having like an intimacy coordinator on set would have really helped out with pushing some of those things. And that was a learning experience for me. This was the first project I made outside of film school. So it was like outside of like my friends and my close-knit group. So these were all me managing a crew of people. And that was one of the biggest takeaways actually, because, yeah, it's tough. But, to alleviate a lot of problems earlier on, vetting out the cast, vetting out the crew to make sure people don't have some of those biases that you would be surprised a lot of folks do. And also just hiring more diverse people to really, it brings a lot and it brings the ease to some of those tensions earlier on.
Carlton, you mentioned a role of an intimacy coordinator. That's something that doesn't get talked about too often. Can you talk about what that is and what kind of role that functions on a film set, sort of?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about it. I think it's a fairly new concept, but they're really common now. But people who are, trained and well versed in using the language to work with actors in terms of like, having kissing scenes or sex scenes, or they're really able to make the actors feel at ease and maybe use that language that the director or producers may not have, to really make sure everyone feels comfortable and protected on set. So you can really push those scenes the way that you would really want to. And you can really get the actors to trust you and to feel comfortable and to really experiment. So, but I agree well going in. Now I do.
I also, yeah, in a perfect world, would have loved to have like an intimacy coordinator on set. I think that, like Carlton was saying, just making that effort to have a really inclusive, as inclusive as possible of a cast or crew, and having the team, like with a queer film, I always strive for like majority LGBTQ identifying crew if possible. Is just really helpful. And it's not just like a statistic. There's also, if you think about it, there's maybe lesser experienced queer filmmakers coming up in like New York City where we were filming, who could learn and be mentored by the more senior experienced queer people on set. And nurturing our queer family of filmmakers is something that's really important to me. And to the point of like delicacies or intricacies on set of like making a queer film. Something that happened on our set that was kind of funny looking back on it was that there's one particular very brief scene in our film during their more intimate moments where if you've seen it, then you probably know what I'm referring to in terms of James using a douching bulb in the bathroom. And we were running out of time that day, and the straight members of our crew had suggested that we cut that scene. And James kind of gave me this look of like, I literally wanted to do this film partly because of the details like that were included that I have never seen before on screen, and we need to get that. And so when people were kind of wrapping up for the day, we like very quickly got that scene in like 20 minutes.
That scene's incredible, and that scene was so refreshing and awesome. It was like I was like celebrating when that scene was going on. It's an amazing scene, so I'm so glad that you did listen to.
It's been really interesting to see sort of the reaction on either end of like, oh, that felt so affirming, or I had an uncle who saw it who we had quite the conversation afterwards. So he had a few questions for me, and so I'm really glad that it made it.
It made it really real. Like I really felt like that scene like connected the whole experience of that weekend. I don't know.
I felt like, you know, there's something about to decide to do that if you have never really done that before is such a big emotional moment, even though it seems so simple on screen. And so that was something James and I talked about a lot was, you know, there is a massive, massive weight in deciding like, okay, I'm going to try that with somebody that I just met who I've been talking to on a dating app. And so we wanted to try and do that. So I'm glad we did.
I think also like as long as your subjects, whether it's documentary or narrative, that they know where you're coming from as a director and what you want, and if you're on the same page as that and that you are looking for their best interest. I've always found that people just want honesty and real, and you're not there to exploit anyone. And I feel like that's really important on set. I found that having that discussion, if there's stuff that is uncomfortable, that you're open to talking to the people about it, feeling free to be vulnerable. So I don't know, I feel like that's important as a director, I think.
Carlton, I'm interested if you could talk in terms of your film, I guess some of the conversations that you had with the cast in particular about what it is that you were wanting to explore, and in terms of like a queer identity, a Black identity. I imagine it. You really wanted to sort of set the right tone and make sure everyone was on the same page. Can you talk about those first days?
Yeah, I mean, so the first day of shooting, it was a well thought out decision to shoot some of the easier scenes first, so that the cast and crew could get comfortable with each other. We didn't do like some of the most complex scenes. We saved those to the end. So it's a matter of doing the easy stuff first, so everyone can kind of get to know each other. We can make mistakes, and the film is a heavy topic. And I had to have conversations with the actors going into them. And that was also important in casting and choosing actors who understood the world, understood the character struggles, who were actually queer identifying and Black, and who could really bring life and breathe life into those characters honestly and genuinely. So I spent a lot of time with each of the characters before we actually got on set. And, we did our best to kind of tweak those things and kind of tease out the characters and tease out the story a little bit, so that we each could bring something together, because it's like a push and pull with director and actor. It's collaborative, and so yeah.
You had mentioned earlier that there were, I guess, like certain places that you weren't able to kind of get your actor to, and that's such a like frank admission to hear from a director. I love it, actually. Can you talk more about that and that process of kind of working with actors, particularly your film, which your main character goes through quite a bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough conversation to have. I mean, one of the lead characters were, in fact, they identified as being straight, so that's where the challenge came in terms of like pushing the scene. But they were extremely talented, and they had a great audition. But you know, you have to build that trust going in as best as you can. And sometimes you have the luxury to like really spend a lot of time with people, and sometimes you don't. A lot of times you don't have rehearsals. You just kind of go in and on set, and you might do a take a few times before you actually, you know, start recording. And you know, it's not easy, but the actors bring a lot of variety, and we try different things, and we experiment, and we, you know, I try to do something that do it first how I originally wrote it, and then try something completely opposite to that to kind of get a like adverse reaction. And sometimes you get those magical moments from that. But it's really just about trying absolutely everything, and like, you know, not being afraid to make mistakes, not being afraid to experiment, and kind of like just throw things out there. So
That makes me think, and take me to prom. You know, you talked about not wanting to discuss, you know, the meat of your film, the actual prom, and hearing Carlton talk about surprises. Were you surprised, Andrew, in terms of like what came up in terms of these stories?
Yeah, I was really surprised for every single person. Some of them I kind of had an idea what they were going to talk about. Some of them I didn't, but every person had like a little surprise, a little moment that I remembered. Because, you know, there were 8 interviews. I cut one, but there were 8 interviews. And so that was a long 2 days of just like having people talk to me for all day long. And there was always like a moment that I remembered that when I went into the edit room, I was like, we have to like go to this moment. Like things like the greatest example is Elf, the oldest person. And he talked about his like leg fetish and stuff. And that was just so funny and amazing. And I couldn't believe it. And it was one of those moments where like he said that and like everybody on the crew just like froze. And it was so funny. And just also like, it was so inspiring to have like someone of that age and like who he didn't come out until he was 80 years old, who just was so open to like talk about what he liked. And I'm so happy that I just kind of, I really put that off limits. And I want to save it all for the interview, because usually I make observational documentaries. So usually the documentaries that I make, I'm just following people around in their everyday lives. So this was the first time I made a film that was an interview-based film, and I wanted to preserve the style that I like in the other stuff that I usually make, where it's all just like about these unfolding moments. And I really wanted to preserve that feeling of spontaneity. And yeah, it paid off. I was definitely a bit nervous because I didn't know if some of them would have anything to talk about, but I really picked awesome people, and so it was really fun.
Wonderfully diverse. I was really happy.
Yeah.
Dominique,
I was gonna say, well, with the like with having characters who aren't particularly shy, like in the Star Sisters, I'm almost curious as to maybe not just what you weren't like had to leave out of the film, but how did you know what to focus on? I mean, I might be speculating, but they're quite the characters.
They are, and they're really smart. You know what I mean? They're not Grey Gardens. So that's what I loved about them, you know, that, you know, they have a definite style to them. And, but I really wanted to tell, I know we only had like 15 minutes with my co-director, Bridie Elliott, who's not here. So we sort of had bullet points of what we wanted to get done, but I also wanted to show, I just didn't want to talk about the abuse. And so I wanted to talk about, you know, how they got to where they are now, basically. Mm-hmm. And so it was just interesting because I just really had bullet points, and I've known them for 2 or 3 years, and we talk a lot. They could talk about politics, they can talk about Hitler, they can talk about Elvis. I mean, they can talk about anything, and they're amazing. So I got to really learn their story. So I knew the story I wanted to tell. So Bridie and I sort of just had like bullet points. Okay, let's talk about this now. Let's talk about this now. Let's talk about this now. So there was never going to be a structure until once we shot it all. And then we decided what the narrative was going to be of the doc.
Beth, how much did you spend your time like asking questions, and like did they seem like the kind of people who go on tangents?
Yeah.
So did they go on tangents for like an hour or two, or like did you
Yeah, no.
interrupt them?
Yeah, I nipped in.
Okay, you got to interrupt them, yeah.
And also, like, I'd been talking to them a lot for the past 2 years. Like, so I was comfortable enough to be like, okay, let's bring it back, you know, just, you know what I mean? Like, we're going off here now, you know? And so, you know, so I was able to do that, but I also let them, you know, get to a point where I just really wanted them to be free, you know, and be themselves. But yes, you are right. There's times where I had to like, let's go back to topic here, you know. But it was really easy, and we really like we shot in 3 days, and it was. I just am so happy if anyone sees the film that at 75 and 78 you get to tell your story. You know what I mean? And like that's such a beautiful thing, you know. Like at that point in your life, and that's like your film with your 80-year-old guy. You know what I mean? It's like so great. It's
88.
like great. What?
88.
Oh, 88. Oh my God. That's even better.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
Beth, one of my favorite things about your film are these like really idiosyncratic kind of surreal animations, and it adds this nice kind of formal element that sometimes you don't always get with documentaries. And yeah, when did those come into place? Like, how did that come about?
So Brady Elliott, my co-director, who's not here, she knows this amazing animator named Albert Burney, and he lives in Baltimore, Maryland. And she had worked with him before, and we actually got into the Maryland Film Festival, which would have been in Baltimore with him there. And anyway, it's all good. So anyway, so she's the one who brought him to the party. And so it was really, that was a Bridie thing to say, you know, I'm sort of seeing sort of animation in this. And I said, yeah, the layers will be nice. So yeah, so Bridie really brought that. And we really gave it to him to sort of, we gave him direction, but he really came up with stuff on his own. And that's what was so cool. Let me say one thing about this documentary from other stuff I worked on. We only had like 8 people that worked on it between the music and animation, but everybody found something in the Star Sisters in their own way. And I thought that was really awesome. You know, our DP and Albert and our Coco, our music person, and you know, everybody in their own way found this. It was really a collaborative effort, and it was just nice that these ladies like really resonated. Everyone resonated with them differently. I don't know. It was really cool. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. They're lovely ladies for sure.
For Tyler and Carlton, there was it's Tyler. It's really great to hear that it came from a very personal story. Both of your films seem to be very cinematic and be like kind of aware of other films that exist and kind of using some things from other films, and Carlton as well, because when I heard that you actually worked as a mortician or as a mortician for a little bit, I thought that was something that was so good as an allegory or a metaphor for an experience and a feeling, and to hear that came from personal experience as well. I guess I'm just was the nature of your relationship to personal versus, you know, cinema and like using things from other cinema, and how do you find balance with that when coming up with your films?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I mean, there's countless films that have been filmmakers who have inspired me. But, you know, me and my cinematographer really worked together to really create the look and the feel for the film, and to really create a cinematic experience, you know, through using symmetrical framing compositions to handheld, to, you know, shallow depth of field, to using bright colors, to all those things. We really wanted to create the look ourselves. So, I mean, there was a lot of influence, but because I actually worked physically in a funeral space, you know, I was able to recapture lighting and mood probably in ways that someone who's never actually spent time there could have. So I think just my experience alone brought more to the film, just because I knew the culture of the funeral business. So
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. Like like the colors, and when they went to the bar with the blues and the, you know, those beautiful blues, and then when you got to the funeral home, it was really just bleak, like, you know, just very brown and simple, and so the contrast was really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly. I mean, that's what we're going for. I mean, there was an obvious difference between the way we shot the scenes within the funeral home versus outside of that space. So each scene created its own, you know, mood and emotion.
Tyler, what happened in your relationship? Did
I,
did it work because it was long distance? I mean, come on.
I live with them now in the other room.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Yay.
I was like, I wanted them to be together, so I'm happy it worked out.
I moved, yeah, like a month after.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah. And then was
Nice.
awkwardly making this film very early on in the relationship and did not know how to tell them that there was a Kickstarter online. Divulged more than I wanted. But yeah, Zach, to answer your question, I think that you know, my DP Oren Sofer and I talked a lot about, we of course like have our inspirations, and looking ahead into the future, you know, there's certain films and filmmakers that I hope that the stories that I want to tell could kind of fit within the pantheon of that, like that catalog of films, you know what I mean? And so like I know the space where I feel my stories, I hope my stories can go, but from there it's like, okay, we have this toolkit, like how can we tell this story in our unique way? And you know, an approach that we took was, it's kind of subtle, but if you were to go back and rewatch it, it starts out and besides the FaceTime where we're very, very close in at the very beginning, everything starts out at a distance. The first time they're hanging out, they're in silhouette in the bar. And then as they get closer, starting with the more intimate scenes onward, the camera is off the tripod for a bit. It's a little more dizzying. Everything's a lot closer. It has more of a fishbowl feeling where there's a shallow depth of field and you're just in this world with them, like as if you're right in on their conversations. And so we were trying to play with the camera that way and hopefully just make choices to inform, to just elevate the story we're telling.
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out to my DP, Marcus Menzer. I mean, the Star Sisters are larger than life, and then he made everything pop, even like it was Technicolor, you know. So I think that really added to the visual that I was really happy with in the long run, and it just, you know, you couldn't get any more poppier than them, and then the background just exploded too. So it was awesome.
We're going to start getting to some questions, but before we do, I just wanted to pass it to Dominique to see if you had any more questions that you wanted to ask.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to ask Carlton more about homegoing and how the burial practice plays into the themes of the film, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the film was called Homegoing, but we never actually say homegoing in the film. So that's a question I get a lot. But so homegoing in like the African American cultural sense is pretty much, you know, it's how we describe our funerals. They're not really looked at as death being the ending, but kind of a spiritual journey to a world that transcends suffering, that transcends injustice, and pretty much giving our people the respect and death that they didn't receive in life, by giving them a really beautiful service, which we call homegoing. So I thought that alone kind of encapsulated what the film meant in its entirety, you know, giving the main character that respect, you know, after he passes. And yeah, I mean, what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
I'm just curious about how that ties into the themes of the film.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that, you know, I find Black funeral homes really exquisite spaces because their businesses passed down from generation to generation, because they are one of the few businesses in Black communities that are not beholden to white power structures, because they're often looked at as leaders within their community. I mean, dating back from the Jim Crow era, when they were the first to be called for bodies being lynched from a tree down south, to civil rights, to now, where they're the first who are called for Black and brown women and men who are being, victims of gun violence. I just wanted to, almost pay homage to those people because they're leaders in our community, and really show that they're not just, funeral owners. There's so much more depth to them, and there's so much more depth to businesses in our communities, and there's so much more depth when you're talking about systemic racism, and you're doing it through the lens of business that in a country where there's a huge wealth gap, but this country has been able, or this business has been able to sustain, and what that means as the generations are passed down from the next, and what that means for what it could do to the community, what it can mean for the other people who are coming there, in every sense, whether you're working there, whether you're helping service a family, or whether anything. It just kind of touches on a lot of those different themes that I'm trying to talk about, discuss. So.
Yeah, Raymond asked that question of how did you decide on the title of Homegoing, which you just answered. So
yeah.
Thank you, Raymond, for your question as well. And let's see, I'm going to open it up to a couple of questions, and then we can get back to the programmers as well. From Harlan, Harlan asks, how difficult is it to obtain funding for an LGBT film as opposed to a more mainstream film? I guess that would imply whether you've tried to get funding for a more mainstream or hetero film in the past, and if there's been differences, and if you know that experience, and if it is a difference for you. Let's start with Tyler.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get funding for any film. I can speak to, I'm currently developing my first feature, which is a queer film, and which has been really exciting, but throughout the process thus far, and I've been developing it, I'm about 7 months into this process. I've had several mentors or queer people in the industry kind of preface, or give me kind of a pep talk or a real talk about the uphill battle that I have ahead, and how much work there really is left to go, despite the fact that there are a couple films we can point to as having broke through the noise. Small and niche are very coded words still, and and sometimes you're often told that if somebody already has an LGBT film on their slate, then for some reason they can't pursue yours as well, even if it is something they feel passionate about. And so those kinds of things are very, very prevalent. They still exist. It's super unfortunate, incredibly systemic, and hopefully we'll be able to start to change it. And I guess with that, a strategy we've been taking to try and make the funding process a little easier for us, or we've been trying to assess, okay, what are the entry points to make this a film that is irrefutably queer, but even in the pitch, undeniably accessible to everybody, because ultimately the hope is both to create something that's validating for queer audiences and illuminating and enticing for straight audiences as well. I always think when I'm developing this project, I always think of like my grandmother, and I want this to be a film that she would even seek out to go see, and trying to figure out where the middle ground is, if that makes sense.
If that's me or not. For the documentarians, I imagine that you've made a lot of different types of movies and documentaries. So I don't know if you have a lot of experience compared from one to the other, but yeah, go ahead, I guess.
This was actually the easiest film to fund that I've ever made. It's the first queer film that I've ever made, but it was shockingly quick. It took a 15-minute meeting, and the public broadcaster in Canada approved it. So I don't know, for whatever reason, this one in particular was very easy to make. I felt very lucky. They gave me a lot of trust. I think at least like in the landscape, like in Canada where I live, there's like a real appetite for those kinds of stories. And I'm not actually making any queer films at the moment, but I feel like when I do, because I will make more, I am hopeful that appetite will still be there, because I had so much support. I was so lucky, and they left me alone. They let me do whatever I wanted. I was very lucky.
Carlton, and you're working within the space of Black queer cinema, which has changed somewhat within the last decade or 5 years, but obviously is an other in the film industry and the market, and so I guess how have you had experience of trying to get funding for films that are more kind of hetero or mainstream as compared to this, and is there a difference for you?
I mean, I would say for this film was different because we actually won a grant to produce it, which was really great. And I think in that sense, when you're applying to grants, I think it's great if you have stories and characters that are representing diverse voices. But I also think that to kind of piggyback on what Tyler mentioned, like I'm also in a stage where I'm, in development for my first feature. And, we do hear things from production companies like, we already had a Black gay film. That's the only one we can do. So that that creates a problem, right? Because it's like, there's a million of films that have like war stories or about World War II, but there can only be one, Black queer story, it seems. So it is harder. It is a challenge when you need bigger budgets and you're looking for more funding and, taking on bigger projects and reaching out to bigger studios or production companies. The challenges are still there. So, I don't really have an answer of how to overcome that, but, it's something that we're currently navigating. And, we need more people in leadership to start greenlighting our projects for LGBT people.
That speaks to the last comment from Harlan as well, which was, it was a comment from something Robert said, was that Robert wants to see LGBT films get far more play. How as filmmakers do you see such a movement getting started? Do you consider yourself part of? Is there a collectivism to making queer cinema, LGBTQ cinema for all of you? Do you feel a lot of unity, or is there something that feels organized as a filmmaking collective for all of you? Tyler or anyone really?
Yeah, I want to see many more queer films get far more play as well. I think something that comes up a lot, and this sort of ties into the previous question as well, is that you have a lot of executives who it makes a lot of sense why they say this, but the thing that you often hear is you need to have at least one or two like bankable names in your cast. And so when you're looking at your cast and you've written a film where everybody is queer, you're like, you quickly realize how small that list actually is. Like, it feels on some level, some days I'm like, oh wow, like queer cinema is really making strides. And then you start looking at like who your options are for like household names to be in your film to ensure it gets far more play and continue to pave the way for even more. And it's hard unless you're already an established voice as a filmmaker where you can break out talent to be able to, there's sort of a catch-22 there. But I do feel a collectivism. I do feel excited that we're a part of sort of a generation and a world where we can tell queer stories that aren't just about our victimhood with regards to like the AIDS crisis or coming out, and we can really be a part of something that speaks to the breadth of our experience in terms of the stories we all get to tell together.
And I just want to say that, part of the responsibility for that is also on exhibition and programmers, and Dominique and Robert do so much for that kind of collectivism and that work as well. And I just know from the festivals that you work for and the platforms that you work for that, we have a responsibility towards that as well. absolutely. And we're trying to grow in value within that constantly. And so I just wanted to commend the two of you for the work that you try to do within that as well. So really happy to have y'all here.
I can just say to that too, Zach, that like, and Dominique, I'm sure you have experience with this also as a queer person in these spaces, going beyond just having the one gay film in the lineup, and calling that out as tokenism. And, unfortunately, sometimes it takes the gay person in the room to sort of draw attention to that. So, yeah, we're trying, Dominique, right? Didn't do what we
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like what's great about this panel is that every single one of these films touches on a different identity, and queerness is involved, but queer people are also many other things. And so, I mean, that's part of why that's important is trying to get more than one film to be seen by audiences, because we're not all the same, and we all have many, many, many different experiences.
I have a question from David Sperling. Thank you for your question, David. I often feel less than satisfied by short films, but all of your films were fantastic and deeply satisfying. It was especially gratifying being able to identify with the people on the screen. Were any of you frustrated by working within the constraint of the short form? It seems like there was a lot of intention for these being shorts going into them. But I imagine the editing process can be grueling as well. So was there any frustration with being within the short form? Was there, go ahead and Beth, you can start it off if you like.
Oh, okay. Why am I always first?
I don't know.
Anyway,
so where I came to, yeah.
Okay, I'm just kidding you. So I think that I felt like that our documentary had to have a beginning, middle, and end. Like there had to be a story that you got to know who they were, and then tell this story, and then where they are now. So I feel like that we achieved that in the short form, which I'm really happy for. Like, I really feel like people have been wanting more, but I feel like it really encapsulated the people that I know, and they're so happy with all the information that was able to be told in that 15 minutes. So I think for me, I'm just really happy that people want more as opposed to wanting less. So I think and they were happy. And for me, like when you do someone's subject and you're taking their life story, for them to be happy, and that's all that mattered, So I feel like the short form was perfect, and I love being part of the ShortFest. I love seeing people's short films. I love the whole short world. I think it's just amazing, and there's so much expression, and there's so much difference, and I think it's freeing. I think like all the things that I've seen, all your shorts, there's some like just freedom in a short that you don't get in a long, hour and a half film. So that's my thoughts.
Carlton, it seems like a film that could be a feature. Is there any thought of it being a feature? Or was there any constraint about the length of it being longer? What was the process like just with the form for you?
No, I mean, the film, I actually wrote the script for the feature prior to making the short film. Yeah. I adapted the short so I could have a visual concept of, the feature that I'm trying to make. So I didn't feel any constraints. I thought it was actually a great exercise because it helped kind of like foresee some of the problems that may occur when it's time to make the feature, and not even problems on set, but problems within my writing, within the story. So it helped me to really create that world, create the characters. It was a great exercise, and I also cultivated relationships with other filmmakers and crew members who I can hopefully bring along with me for the next project. So
you have an amazing crew, people that have done amazing work, people that have been in ShortFest before, your cinematographer, your producer. It's really, you have good company as far as the people that you're working with. So
yeah, thank you. They're the best.
Yeah. Let's see. Anyone else want to kind of talk about the constraints of the length of shorts?
for me, like the film that I got was the one that I had sort of imagined in my head, but I did find editing it was really difficult because everybody, all seven of them were just so amazing in their own way, and it was hard for me to remain focused on like the purpose that they served within the larger whole, because I just got so wrapped up in each of them because they each had like an hour with me or an hour and a half, and I found myself really having to exercise a lot of like self-control in the edit room, be like, okay, like we can't talk about, you know, Marcy's job where she, you know, photographed cadavers in LA or whatever. Like, you know, they all just had these crazy stories. And so that was difficult, but I feel like I left inspired to make like a documentary, like 7 documentaries about 7 amazing people, and I'm hoping to try and take a crack at some of them because they're just amazing people.
Tyler, see you soon. Something that you've also in a similar way, which is but that exercise is something that I recommend. Friends will ask me who are trying to write something. I'll say like, if you have a feature, don't make the short first. Write the script and then maybe make the short afterwards. So it's a real, and you can tell because the detail in your film is so. Is that something that you were doing with See You Soon? Is there a feature form of it in the works?
I didn't want to place the pressure to kind of hold myself to making a feature adaptation of See You Soon, but I did know that the feature I wanted to tell had a very, very intimate queer relationship that was putting certain things on the screen that I had not seen before, like little details like what we had talked about. And so for me, I wanted to use the short as an exercise in tone, and an exercise in just an intimate character relationship, because now as I've been like taking this out as the proof of concept sample, it's in plot, it's not the same, but I always say it's tonally similar to the feature, and that has seemed to be successful so far. And I feel like I learned so much about how to achieve that tone by doing it. And yeah, likewise, I always tell people make as many shorts as you can, however you can.
Last question, also from Harlan, is just to Beth, and it's a Beth. Do you have any knowledge of the Brown twins in San Francisco? These ladies became cultural icons for decades with dress, way of talking, and love of the city. Do you know who they are?
No, they were called the Brown twins?
Yeah.
No, now I will, when we're done with this, I will be Googling that. No, I know nothing about them, but I love the name, the Brown twins.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
are they still alive?
Hold on, let's Harlan, I'm gonna bring
Okay.
you live. We're gonna have you answer this live. Harlan,
Okay.
you should be. I'm unmuting you. Go ahead. You can answer this question for us, Harlan.
Unfortunately, one of the sisters, Vivian, passed away last year. They were well into their 90s
Wow.
when they passed. When I was living in San Francisco and knew them in passing, it would have been in the late 70s through the mid 80s. And they were everywhere, from a supermarket opening to a political rally. And they were always dressed exactly the same matching outfits, same hats, same gloves, same little purse. And they stood about maybe 4'11",
Oh,
maybe
wow.
5 feet if they stretched a little bit, but they were always enthusiastic about the city, what was going on in the city, and how happy they were to be a part of that culture.
They sound amazing. Were they political?
No, they were not. And that's one of the things about them that was so joyful, is that they were accepted by all elements of the city. You would find them, I found them at a leather pride parade once, and I went over to there and asked them, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, we were invited." Okay.
Thanks, Harlan.
That's cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I think that is all the time we have. This was a really great conversation. It's so fun to be able to have these longer form conversations because of this format. Thank you all for your films. I want to thank Robert and Dominique for joining in as well, and for the work that they do at the festival. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all of you, and of course the members in attendance. We'll be posting this video soon, so you can see it on YouTube or tell your friends to see it there. And please suggest that people watch these films if they haven't already as well. And thank you all so much for making yourself available to ShortFest. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for
us.
coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you all for